Well, good afternoon, Department of Behavioral Health. I hope you're doing well this fine Thursday afternoon. We're having a little technical difficulty today, so I'm sorry we were not able to get the live stream features working. So I know you're watching this on a recording. Thank you for bearing with us. Unfortunately, because of that, I won't be able to do live question and answer today. So you can still send questions to Tina Young, and we'll try to incorporate those in the next update. If they're time sensitive, we might be able to push something out before then, but certainly I can incorporate them in the next update. So thank you for your patience. If you've seen the prior update where we did a little behind the scenes with Brian, you know that it's quite a complex array of technology that makes the update happen. And I think Brian might have even said things go wrong sometimes, and so we just had a software glitch today. So thanks for rolling with us. So I'm going to hop right into a very short presentation, and then I have a featured speaker. In a couple of updates, I've mentioned that I was going to be having Jonathan Halverstad join us to talk a little bit about the brain, so that's on deck today. So we're going to talk a little bit about COVID. It's really kind of nice to be able to share with you that we're seeing some stability with the low COVID case rates. Back in February, around Valentine's Day, the 14th, we were at 92.5 cases per 100,000, and now we're at 3.1 cases per 100,000. And the last time I was with you was about 3 weeks ago, and I reported that we were at 3.7. So that's pretty nice to see, just a nice low number of COVID cases in the community. So transparently sharing with you, last week I was in a call with public health and the case rate was actually even a tiny bit lower. It was at 2.5. And so we dipped way down and now we have a tiny uptick. But that tiny uptick was in fact expected. The reason for that is that our colleagues in public health were seeing that the Bay Area counties were having a little bit of an increase and we tend to trail them in an increase. Now, our colleagues in public health are not expecting us to see a very steep increase in cases, not a big surge. Of course, anything can happen with this virus. We don't know what the future holds, but because the Central Valley counties were hit so very hard with the Omicron variant, we're not really expecting to be hit again as hard as we were. But the future will tell, and we'll keep everyone posted in these updates. And of course, you can always look to the Fresno County Public Health webpage for our local data. They have that updated fairly regularly. Other good news in COVID is that the hospitalizations for persons with COVID are still staying pretty low. We actually, in mid-February, were at 446 people in the hospital with COVID, and we're at 38 this week. So huge improvement. And 31 ICU bed capacity is a really nice number to see, because also lots of reasons that people go to the hospital and end up in the ICU, not just COVID. So having the capacity here in our local area is really important. So that's also good news on the COVID front. A few updates. The federal and state guidance on masking has shifted a bit. You might have seen this in the news. There is no longer a mask requirement on public transportation at the federal level as well as in California. They are strongly recommending masking indoors. Now, of course, here in healthcare, we are doing universal masking, including behavioral health buildings, so that will continue unless we receive some other guidance. There is a booster update available. The FDA did authorize a second booster for certain groups. And those groups include persons who are 50 years old and above, people who are between 18 and 49 who had the Johnson & Johnson vaccine as their primary vaccine and a booster of that. They would be eligible for a second booster as well. And then people who are 12 years old and up if they're immunocompromised. As always, continue to do your daily health screening on the app, and then if you're sick, stay home. Not just because of COVID, but there's a lot of stuff going around all the time, and so we want to just make sure that we're not spreading things around to one another. A little bit of an update on remote work. I know that folks have been asking a lot of questions of their managers and supervisors, and so I do want to assure you that we're pretty close to some final decisions. And most areas, most functions of the department where people were doing some remote work because of the Omicron surge, most of those folks have returned to some form of a hybrid strategy, meaning sometime in the office and sometime remote working. And so we have made the decision that for our first year of post-emergency order remote work, we will be piloting this at a 50% strategy. So for those functions, positions, and people who are able to work with the agreement signed with their supervisor, they would be at up to 50% remote work. Now, for some staff, that remote work doesn't mean work from home. We often say work from home because that is a common strategy. But a lot of our services, for example, are community-based. So we might not be actually working from home. We might be leaving from home to go do our work out in the community and then not reporting back into the office. So that might be a strategy for some of our teams. I do want to make a little notation here to level set in terms of expectations. There have been a few questions about what will it look like if a person is eligible to remote work and they're given a schedule of the days that they're remote working and the days that they're in the office, but then there's a meeting that gets called and it's an in-person meeting. Well, the expectation would be that the person goes to the meeting because that's an essential function of the assignment. So for example, I'll use myself. I rarely remote work, but on occasion I do. And if there's a meeting that my boss calls and I report to the county administrative officer, I have to go to that meeting. That's part of my job duties. And so I wouldn't be remote working on a day like that. Or if I started out remote working and something happened that required my presence in the department in person, I would be already dressed for the workday and I would hop in my car and get to wherever that need was. And so the same expectation would be for any of us across the department. It's always going to be individualized, so I don't have any information to share with you in terms of some universal policy, but you can certainly go to your supervisor and your manager, and I'm very hopeful that in the weeks ahead, those of you who are in a position that's eligible to remote work would be having conversations with your supervisor about whether that might apply to you. So more to follow. A few announcements on the May activities. The Guiding Principles in Action campaign should be released out probably tomorrow. We've got the form for folks to fill out, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, I did talk briefly last time, but this is a May campaign that was brought back by a request from a staff member who remembered it from 2020 and said it was really good to be able to acknowledge colleagues who are demonstrating in their day-to-day work our guiding principles. And so we liked that suggestion that staff had, and we thought that was a really, really great idea. So we brought it back. It will be kicked off with an email from me, as I said, probably tomorrow. Transparently, I wanted to get that done earlier this week, and I just haven't had a chance to get to it, but it will get pushed out before the 1st of May. And I look forward to seeing all of the nominations, and we'll be able to lift each other up in spirit of our guiding principles. May also is Mental Health Awareness, which is why we're doing the campaign in May. And so on Tuesday, we'll have a proclamation before the Board of Supervisors, and I hope you'll all pay attention to your emails to see all of the cool information and announcements coming from the Public Behavioral Health Division as we really acknowledge mental health awareness. The NAMI event, the NAMI Walk event, is at Woodward Park on May 14th. So I know a lot of folks like to get out there. I'm looking forward to it, being outdoors and seeing folks in person. Probably a lot of people I haven't seen in a long time. So I'm really excited about it, and I hope you're able to join us. And then the other in-person activity that's back is the Staff Appreciation Picnic. I did mention previously that we're going to have a boxed lunch strategy so that folks can grab and go if that's their preference, and other folks who want to stay and hang out together can do that in person. It will be an outdoor activity. If the weather is poor, for example, if it's raining, it will be a grab and go. Obviously, unless folks just really appreciate the rain, I suppose folks could hang out in the rain if they wanted to, but our backup strategy would be a grab and go. So we're really looking forward to that, and we hope you enjoy that event next month. So I mentioned we have Jonathan Halverstadt here with us today. It is Stress Awareness Month, so it's kind of nice timing for his presentation. I want to really acknowledge his expertise. I've been privileged to work with Jonathan for a number of years, and I'm always impressed that he's not only a great clinician, but he's really quite a scholar. And he's extensively studied the human brain and the impact that our wellness has, or the impact that our brain health has on our wellness. It's really that connection, that biopsychosocial connection. And so he's going to share with you all today some really cool brain images and talk a little bit about how we can all individualize our own brain health to support our wellness. So I hope you enjoy this presentation from Jonathan Halverstadt.
Thank you, Susan. I appreciate those kind words. And before I start the presentation, I just thought I'd share that next month I'll be retiring from Fresno County. I've been in this business for about 35 years now, and it's time to take a break and spend more time with my wife and my grandkids and with my gardening. So it's been a good run, and I'm grateful for the many friends and colleagues that I've met and worked with and enjoyed this process along the way, both our in-house people and our contractors. It's been a good run, so thank you. The information I want to share with you today, I'm going to share a lot of brain scans, and these are not my property. I actually have these through the auspices of Dr. Daniel Amen, who's a well-known neuropsychiatrist. You may see him on public television specials from time to time and on the Dr. Oz show and Dr. Phil and things like that. But I worked with Dr. Amen for a number of years, and I'm grateful that he's given me permission to use these slides that were taken while I was working at the Amen Clinic many years ago. So enough said about that. Let's go ahead and get into the presentation. So in imaging the brain, there's a lot of different ways to do that. What we're going to look at today are SPECT studies. That's a special type of imaging. And when we look at these pictures, we're going to be looking at blood flow in the brain, not brain mass. And it really kind of provides a window into the soul. There's a lot of things that we can see and tell about what somebody's experiencing just from looking at what's taking place in blood flow in their brain. The pictures that I'm showing are a bit antiquated. These are from over 20 years ago, but back then we'd been doing brain studies, not the Amen Clinic, but brain imaging in general for over 20 years, and we had over 100,000 studies that we had done. At this point, Dr. Amen's got well over 500,000 slides. I lost count now as to what he's actually at, of not just slides, but of actual case studies. So I'm going to be using some terminology today that may not be familiar to you. Do not worry about that. Don't feel like you have to take notes. The only reason you would take notes is because some of this information, if you are ever on Jeopardy, you might want to know some of this. But other than that, don't worry about it. It's going to be really pretty simple. So this is a picture of the camera that took the pictures that we're going to look at. This is a Picker Prism 3000 gamma camera, and again, that's a Jeopardy question, so write that down if you ever think you're going to be on the show. Taking these brain images is a two-stage process. We actually have to introduce a radioactive isotope into the bloodstream so that the isotope will tag the blood flow, and then the camera takes the pictures of that blood flow at that point. This is a three-headed SPECT, so here's one head of the camera, two head, three heads. The individual lays down on this platform. They have their head here. This lifts up and raises back into there. It's not like an MRI. It's very quiet. The hardest thing is laying completely still for 15 minutes while the camera takes the pictures. Other than that, it's easy to fall asleep while you're laying there. So SPECT, this is again a Jeopardy question. SPECT stands for Single Photon Emission Computerized Tomography. And again, we're looking at blood flow in the brain, not brain mass. That's really important to remember. I'll say that several times during the presentation. So because we have generated these images through digital computer work, we can look at the brain in many different ways. We can look at it from top to bottom, from side to side, from front to back, and more importantly, we can look at three-dimensional models. So in this surface view, the colors here don't mean anything. It's just to give us a sense of 3D depth perception. So here's the forehead, Here's the back of the brain, here's the left side, and here's the right side. And it's as if there were a camera in the ceiling looking straight down on the person's head, okay? Now again, this is blood flow, it's not brain mass. When we look at what we call an active view, this blue matrix that you see is actually showing the demarcation of the surface. And what we want to see in healthy blood flow activity in the brain is exactly what we're seeing here. From this point, which is about the area of the parietal lobes, to the back of the brain, if there's increased blood flow, that's not a problem. That's actually expected, and we will see more of that in athletes because of hand-eye coordination and all kinds of autonomic functions that take place back here. So seeing increased blood flow, and that's what this color, this reddish pinkish coloration is that's increased blood flow. Back here, not a problem. If there were increased blood flow up here or decreased blood flow, like this is a little bit of decreased blood flow right there, that can cause problems. Now, in this situation, nothing here that's going to cause a problem. These are both, these are two different brains, but both very healthy looking brains. This is what we would want to see in blood flow. Unfortunately, it doesn't always look like that. I've had numerous brain scans in my lifetime when I was a clinician there, and I wish my brain looked as good as these, but oh well, you get what you get, right? So I'm going to show you some different regions of the brain and talk a little bit about what they do. In this picture, this is an active view, so here's the forehead, here's the back of the brain, the left side, the right side, and you can kind of see the left temporal lobe here and the right temporal lobe. We're looking at the underneath side of the brain, all right? So earlier we had a camera shooting down. This is like the camera is looking from the person's feet up towards their head. And the arrow is pointing to this region right here. Now remember, we said from here back, if there's this increased activity, not a problem, that's a good thing. Generally speaking, that's a good thing. But from here forward, if we see dropouts, decreased perfusion or increased perfusion, that can cause a problem. So this is the limbic system. That's why I show you this slide, because otherwise you wouldn't see anything in this region. I'd just be drawing a circle. That's the limbic system. When it's overactivated like this, people will have major depressive disorder symptoms. All right? This is another Jeopardy term, the basal ganglia. We all have them in our brain. There's the left basal ganglia, or rather the right basal ganglia and the left basal ganglia. This is the forehead, back of the brain, left side here and right side. Again, we should just see the blue matrix here showing nice even distribution of blood flow. For this person, their right basal ganglia and their left basal ganglia are working too hard. When that happens, they will have problems with anxiety. And it could be that they have a withdrawn type of anxiety. Could be that they have an irritable type of anxiety. It just depends upon which basal ganglia, left or right, is more activated or underactivated. Another Jeopardy thing that you would want to know is the term the prefrontal cortex. So if you took your hand on your head, I could have had a V8. I don't know if you remember that commercial. When you hit your head, you're actually hitting the prefrontal cortex. So in this picture, here's the forehead, here's the back of the head, here's the left side, here's the right side. We're looking at the underneath side, and we see nice, full perfusion of blood. This little black hole here is not a hole. That's a place of decreased blood perfusion. It's not that there's no perfusion there, it's just nowhere near as much as what we'd want to see. But I will tell you, that's not significant enough to cause problems for this person whatsoever. On the other hand, when we look at this side, what looks like two big holes in here, you ever heard somebody say they act like they got a hole in their head? Well, this might be what they're talking about. Now, there's no hole in their head, there's no hole in their brain. This is decreased blood flow. But the behavior is kind of like they have holes in their brain. This is because the prefrontal cortex is what's referred to as executive function. In a corporation, we want executives to make good decisions, so they have to, process information. And that's what happens in the frontal lobes. We process information. We're able to maintain attention and a focus. We can process information like feelings. We can process intellectual information. We can integrate memories and new information. There's a lot that takes place here. So when there's decreased blood flow here, people are going to have problems with those functions. Why? It's not because of their heart and soul. It's because there's a medical problem. Their brain is not working the way it's supposed to. And the good news is there's a lot of different things that can be done, including medication, that can make things like this better. Let's look at another region of the brain. So here's the back of the head, here's the forehead, here's the left side, here's the right side. Again, from here back, we see increased blood flow. That's not a problem. This is a great looking brain. I wish my brain looked like that. Oh well. So this is what we want it to look like. This active view, we're looking at a region of the brain called the Cingulate Gyrus. All right, again, that's a Jeopardy term. Don't worry about it for today. There's no test on this other than Jeopardy. But the Cingulate Gyrus starts way back here at the back part of the brain, comes over the top of the brain, well, maybe about an inch below the surface, and all the way down into the forehead area, or down into the prefrontal cortex. Now, should look like this on the left, but when it looks like this, that part of the brain is working too hard. When it works too hard, it causes problems. So when we see this, we know somebody's going to have symptoms of obsessive compulsive disorder. It will be my way or the highway thinking. They'll have difficulty seeing options in situations. Once they latch onto this is the way it should be, they have a hard time letting go of that. That's not because of their heart and soul. That's because of the way that their brain is working. And the good news is that there are things that we can do to make that better. So we can look at a lot of different disorders in the brain, and each disorder kind of has its own unique blood flow signature. So in this surface view, this is somebody that has schizophrenia, and you can see there are major parts of the brain that are just not working the way they're supposed to. That's because there's not the right amount of neurotransmitters in that area, and which not the right amount of blood flow, and so it's just not working the way it's supposed to. If we were to look at an active view of somebody that has schizophrenia, we would also see hot spots like this, or places that there's too much blood flow. So it's not just one, or the other, it's both and. Right? Bipolar has its own specific look, where the cingulate is overactivated. There's more activity in the basal ganglia and the temporal lobes as well. And there's some increased activity also in the front part of the parietal lobes. So, major depressive disorder, we've seen this earlier, so increased activity in the limbic system. We've seen obsessive compulsive disorder. Anxiety, issues here, and ADHD. We've seen these pictures. So there's a lot of different things that can be done to help this, whether it's medication, psychotherapy, all different kinds of cognitive behavioral therapy. There are many different roads to Rome, if you wish, for making things better for people. And I want you to know things can change. If they couldn't change, I don't know why we'd be in this business. That's what we do, is we offer hope that there is change. So I want to show you something that maybe people don't think about, but hormones can play a huge part in the way that our brains work. This is a wonderful study of a young woman, married, has children, and what we used to call PMS, we now call premenstrual dysphoric disorder. And so this is her at day 29 in her cycle, and her cingulate is incredibly overactivated, which makes her argumentative. She's not able to see options in situations, and it's difficult for her and her relationships, both at home and at work. Day 7, she didn't have those problems. What happened? That's about the interplay between hormones and neurotransmitters and blood flow in the brain. So what the doctor did in this situation was to give this woman a low dose of a antidepressant medication that increases serotonin. The reason why is not because she has depression, but because we know that by increasing serotonin in the brain, we can oftentimes get this region of the brain to normalize in blood flow, and they have access to the brain that they want rather than the brain that comes and goes depending on where they are in their hormonal cycle. It's amazing the things that we can do these days. This is a picture of somebody that has PTSD, and this is a pretty standard blood flow pattern for PTSD. There's increased activity of the basal ganglia, of the cingulate gyrus, and also the limbic system. And this is about survival of the fittest. So if you think about it, you've got somebody who has not had a traumatic experience, as was the case for this woman, who was a young woman in her late 20s, early 30s, who did not have any symptoms of PTSD prior to being traumatized, but she was kidnapped at gunpoint and violently raped. And her symptoms of PTSD that we would know from the DSM and from talking with friends and family who have been through this, a lot of symptoms that most of the public is aware of these days, these symptoms became evident in her. The problem is that the brain has adjusted to protect the individual and keep the species and the human alive. Why would it do this? Well, by increasing the blood flow to the basal ganglia, increasing anxiety, that causes the adrenal glands to put out more adrenaline, so we're always in a state of fight or flight, so we can take care of ourselves and protect ourselves. We're going to be hyper alert out of that to make certain that we don't ever have to go through this again. The cingulate gyrus is overactivated because I'm going to constantly be on the lookout. I'm not going to let go of that. I'm not going to let go of that. I'm not going to let go of that because I need to always be watching. I need to always remember so that I can survive. And then the limbic system, one of the things that happens with the limbic system is that charged memories are housed there. There are several different memory spaces in the brain, but charged memories specifically to the limbic system. And so you would imagine that there are some charged memories around PTSD. Well, those have to be there in order for survival of the fittest, for this individual to survive out in the open. Now, here's a really cool thing, especially for your clinicians that are clued into this, is that we took this scan of this individual, and then 3 days later, she had her first session of eye movement desensitization reprocessing, so EMDR. And we scanned her brain 45 minutes after she finished her first EMDR session. This changed. In fact, a lot of things changed in her brain. We saw parts lit up that weren't lit up before and parts that had decreased activity. It was kind of like a hodgepodge of everything. And it was like, what in the world is this? Well, if you follow Francine Shapiro's work, Francine developed EMDR, it's about the brain really processing information and figuring out what to do with it. And we could actually see that taking place with the blood flow in her brain that first session that she had EMDR. Her brain was working with the information that was stored there and figuring out how to do with that information differently so that she could let go of those survival things that her brain were doing and could move on with her life. The one slide that I wish that I had that I could show you, I don't have. And it was actually a slide of my brain. One of the benefits of working at the Amen Clinic for Behavioral Medicine was if somebody did not show up for their brain scan, the radioactive isotope is rather expensive, and at that point it had already been paid for. So one of the agreements that we had with Dr. Amen was we would be able to get our brain scanned. And the benefit of that for us as clinicians was the more that we understood what was taking place in our brains, the more that we understood our own behaviors and knew what we were like, the better we could correlate that with the more understanding we had and the better questions we could ask diagnostically when working with the people that we served. So it was a wonderful godsend to have that. Unfortunately, at that period of time in my life, I'd been in an abusive relationship for a relatively long period of time. And would make sense, well, why didn't you get out? Well, there were cultural reasons for why I stayed in that relationship, and it made sense to me at that time that I would do that. But finally, it became evident to me that I needed to get out of that relationship to protect myself and my own mental health. So the interesting thing was, after being in an abusive relationship, when I say abusive, I'll give you an idea. It was not safe, oftentimes was not safe for me to go home. So I can't tell you how many times I slept in my car at a truck stop. I slept in my office on the couch. I slept at a friend's house. I slept in the pews at a church. I slept at the pastor's house. There were some people that lived about a half hour away that said, you can come stay at our place. We have a guest room. I stayed there for 3 weeks straight one time. But that's how horrible it was. And again, it was my choice to stay. It was my choice to leave when I finally did. But that caused havoc on my brain metabolism. And what we saw the night that I got that brain scan was not that there were decreased areas of decreased activity like what you would see holes. It was the overall perfusion of my brain had just decreased dramatically, which explained tremendously the sense of depression that I had, although my limbic system was not overactivated, but the overall perfusion of my brain had just decreased considerably. And the worst part for me was the brain fog. And I would tell people, I can't think my way out of a wet paper bag right now. And it's something that was extremely frustrating for me. I wish I could show you that. I can only tell you about it. But then had to begin my healing process, and that began when I extricated myself from that relationship. And the amazing thing was, and because I was clued into watching my own behaviors in relationship to the brain scans and stuff, is it took really about a year of staying out of the toxic relationship and out of high stress situations for my brain to come back online and for me to regain the cognitive function that I'd had prior to being involved in that traumatic relationship. And it took a lot of self-nurturing for me to come out of that. I can tell you I slept a lot. I had to surround myself with non-judgmental, supportive people. And I purposefully had to avoid any additional stressful situations because it was just overload. There's this basic axiom in life, this is true for all of us. It's like there's a teeter-totter. The higher the level of stress, the lower the level of functioning. That's every single one of us. So if we want to come back to a place of balance, we have to decrease the level of stress or decrease the level of functioning so the stress level will come down. So for me, it was decreasing the level of stress. I learned that I needed to be gentle with myself. Coming from an abusive relationship, it was real easy to have internalized a lot of being harsh on myself. I had to learn to be gentle with myself, and that took time. I attended a lot of support groups and heard other people's stories and had a place to share my story and externalize the internal processes so that would help free me up. I learned to practice, and it was a learned process. I learned to practice an attitude of gratitude. And I had to work at putting fun back in my life. For those of us that are clinicians, we often think of what do we have to do to decrease specific symptoms. And unfortunately, we get our thinking becomes too narrow that way. One of the most important things for people to have in their life is to have fun. I learned this from a 4-year-old who used to live across the street from me, who came across the street one day and said to me, flat out, "Fun is the best thing there is." And I thought, my goodness, he's right. So I had to work at learning how to put fun back into my life. This was hugely, tremendously important, these things important for my own healing process. So in closing, I really want to admonish you to take care of your brain. It's the only brain you're ever going to get. And thank goodness we know that there is a lot of plasticity to the brain. There's a lot of healing that can take place, that there's a lot of different ways that we can treat the brain to help it to work more like it's supposed to. And never, ever believe that it's about your heart and soul when you're struggling with something. It's a medical issue. It's a brain issue. Take that judgment off yourself and look at it for what it is and then find the help that you need. All right? Practice healthy thinking. And if you don't know how to think in healthy ways, then find people who do and hang out with them. Let that rub off on you and you learn how to think in healthy ways. I'm going to say this just because it needs to be said. Stay away from drugs, including alcohol. Alcohol is a drug like any other drug. It's a toxic substance. And we know from doing hundreds, if not thousands, of brain scans of people who have used and abused substances, that is not going to help put out the fire. That's actually putting gasoline on the fire. John Bradshaw, who was a famous author back in the 80s and 90s, said, "The alcoholic is like the man who is on fire and runs into the ocean to put out the fire," which makes a lot of sense. But in the process of doing that, the man drowns. And that's the biggest problem with using drugs and alcohol or alcohol and other drugs to try to put out the fire. It doesn't work. It just makes things worse. So I would admonish you, don't do that. Research shows that deep diaphragmatic breathing, meditative breathing, is tremendously helpful in decreasing stress and calming the brain. We actually have brain scans of this. And now with the functional MRI, we can see that in real time of somebody in a stressful thought process, changing their thought process and seeing their basal ganglia decrease in overactivity and their brain calm itself. We know that this works. I got to tell you, it never worked for me. And I only say that because it maybe will work for you, but maybe it won't. And that's why I say investigate what works for you and do that. Don't let ever somebody shame you that you didn't do this or you should have done that. You might have done it and it just didn't work for you. Research for yourself and find what does work to calm your brain and bring you to a place of peace. It might be about your spiritual walk and how you interact with the higher power of your understanding. And the last thing I would tell you is never give up on yourself. I love that things can get better with, we know that from brain imaging. There's a lot of different things that we can do to take good care of our brain and to make us function better. Thank you so much. I appreciate the years that I've had with you. I hope that this was helpful and informative today. Take care, and I'll see you soon.
Wow, that was so awesome. So much information about the human brain. I'm really always in awe when I listen to Jonathan talk about the brain. I hope you found that valuable. I know I did. As I mentioned previously, we did have technical difficulties, and I'm so sorry about that. Thank you for rolling with us. I often say, I'm like a willow tree. I can bend. We're pretty flexible. I guess that's resilience in vivo right here. So you can still email questions to Tina Young. I just won't be able to answer them live, but we'll try to fold them into the presentation next time. We'll see you again in 2 weeks, and I hope you take care of your brain and your wellness.